So, dear friends, here we are in the middle of October, and it seems to be a beautiful month with so many things happening around us, some not very good things also, but at the same time that the grace of God is overflowing in so many ways. I begin with this message of the week. We have perhaps an ordinary gospel, but with an extraordinary punch, as it were. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 22, verse 1 to 14. And it's a gospel wherein God expresses His longing to meet us, to be with us, and it's explained in the form of a meal. The wedding meal, or perhaps any meal for that matter for the Israelites, was a very special one. They had a lot of rituals as to where to sit, how to talk about, and their meals were long enough to continue the human relationships among them. And to call a person for meal meant not only that you give him good dishes, but also an establishment of a relationship, or perhaps continuing a relationship. They didn't invite everybody for the meals. They invited some special ones, and they were considered really special because they were considered as equal. No one invites someone who is considered below or perhaps a little more inferior for these dinners. The equality was there, the friendship was there, and at the same time, it was a long-lasting relationship they established through the meals. We have that expression in dinner diplomacy. The politicians or perhaps the heads of the nation sometimes they meet over the meal and discuss so many things because they are relaxed. So also God calls us for a meal. The first reading from Isaiah chapter 25, wherein God says, I have prepared a meal, please come. And in this meal, as it were, there are so many things that are going to be rather cured or forgotten. For example, the prophet says, the veil that is over the people, perhaps a veil that covers many things, will be removed. And you will have good meals, as it were, in order to enjoy yourself, and every tear will be wiped away. Meaning to say, if you are coming with some sad incident or perhaps sad experience, surely God will see that you forget about it and you go back happy. So in the gospel, this particular meal that is given by the king because of his son's wedding, and he has sent the invitations of those times, perhaps how they were sent, perhaps they have personally gone and communicated to the people who had to come for this wedding, and everyone has been informed. And so the servant is sent on the last day or perhaps the day before to go and remind them that tomorrow is the wedding and you have to come. Unfortunately, the ones who are called, they have a lot of excuses to give. I have this to do, I have that to do. And it's also mentioned that some of them perhaps will also be treated very roughly, the ones who have gone to remind them to come for the wedding, and some of them will be killed also. And the king, in his anger, of course, to make up also the food that has been prepared, he says, go to the highways and byways and bring whoever is available for this dinner. And the last part of it also, there is a sort of an identity kit, a wedding garment that is not worn by one, which is pointed out very specially. Let me analyze this whole episode in 4 parts. Number 1, the first one is the invitation by God for intimacy with Him. God calls each one of us. God perhaps extends His invitation to each one of us. So often perhaps we have felt that tug in our heart. When you pass by a church, let me just visit and say hello to the Lord. Or perhaps there is someone who is outside of your door, a beggar, a person in need. And then suddenly you feel that perhaps I should do something. There are so many ways we can communicate and be invited, or rather feel the invitation of the Lord in our life. God calls and calls. He keeps on calling. When you see that scene of the prodigal son, the father waiting and waiting and waiting for his son to return. That is God's character, to wait for us, to extend His invitation to all of us. And it does happen. The second part of my analysis would be, there will be some who reject God's call. Because like Martha and Mary, there are some things which are not number one in our life. There are so many other priorities. And therefore, Martha, one thing is missing, Jesus says, and that's the most important thing. For us also, perhaps I have taken some other appointment. I am busy with something else. I want to do some other work, or perhaps genuine or not genuine. I refuse the Lord. I refuse God's invitation. I put it aside. Perhaps I have to go for Mass this Sunday. But then I say, may not be it's important. What's the big thing about it? I'm missing a chance of meeting the Lord. Of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, the sixth gift is the fear of the Lord. Some people think fear is, it's like God is a despot or a dictator type, a monster. Fear of the Lord. It actually means the fear that you will miss God. That you will miss God. Perhaps if you are going to a station today to meet somebody, and unfortunately, the person, if you go late, you may not be able to welcome him. And so you are rushing, and you can say that, I fear that I will miss this opportunity. If suppose one of us is called to be honored by the Prime Minister and the President, and I take my own time to go, I fear that I will miss that important function. A woman who is putting the baby to sleep, she shoos everybody, don't make noise, because I fear the child will get up. This is the fear that I will miss the Lord. And therefore, the second part of the analysis is we really miss out God. We really postpone God. We really want to perhaps to say that this is not the time that I would like to meet God. And if God is the one who invites us, who are we to refuse? But many a time, perhaps not by our words, but by our actions, we refuse the Lord in our life. The third aspect is, God doesn't give up. This perhaps king says, okay, the ones who have been invited have not come. Let me extend my invitation for those who are not invited. Perhaps those last moment once. He says, go to the highways and byways, which means go to everybody. My food is ready, my banquet hall is very big. There are so many seats or chairs that have been put. Who will fill them up? So kindly bring anyone who wants to come here. You can see it in two ways. Number one is, I have lost an opportunity, but someone else has profited by it. We say this ladder of life. Sometimes when we climb the steps together, there are some behind, there are some on top. Maybe we started together in the same rung, as it were, but then how is it that perhaps some have gone above us? Because we also didn't make use of opportunities that God gave us. Our talents and charisms we threw away. There was a youngster who came and told me, a very sincere fellow, and he says, I wasted my time during my graduation. I had some friends who were really not good. They were just distracting, and I used to go with them, long talks and walks and perhaps films and the other things. I got so low marks in my graduation that I just can't proceed now. I can't proceed, but I regret very much. Perhaps it's like that. Some of us have wasted our opportunities, the talents, the charisms that God gave us, and God gives us to the other one. The second part of this is also to say that there are some whom we consider not worthy, but then they get a last chance. The parable that we had 1 or 2 weeks back of the landlord who goes on paying his servants, the one who has come at 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and the last one is at 5 o'clock, as it were, and he is given what is promised to him. But the first one misunderstands and thinks that though I may have been promised that same amount, I will get more because I worked the whole day. And the landlord asks him, who are you to say or to judge my generosity if I want to be generous? And so God wants to be generous to those people who are not invited, but today they are specially invited for this wedding. Perhaps it's a great chance. It's a great chance that we are invited. I have also told in my last Shepherd's Voice about that thief, the good thief that we call on the cross. Perhaps he has not done anything good, but then God gives him mercy. God is merciful and compassionate, and He gives us many things for what we deserve and perhaps what we don't deserve. That's His compassion. That's the mind of the Lord. And fourthly, my fourth analysis of that person who didn't have the wedding garment. The king comes inside and he notices that is a man who has not worn his garment, wedding garment. This again perhaps is another sort of a hint or hit at us to say that those that are invited just can't walk in. There are certain protocols among the Jewish for eating and drinking. They had a lot of protocols. And one of the protocols of this wedding was they had to wear the wedding garment, perhaps a sort of a cape that distinguished you from the others. And that said that you have come for this purpose, and therefore the king finds that one has not worn, and he puts him away, throws him away. And so what is this identity kit for us? This identity is our submission to the Lord in baptism. So at baptism we get a special stamp, as it were, a special ID card, as it were, as a Christian, which we not only wear it but live it all our life. And without it perhaps we will also be missing something, though we have been invited. The last sentence says, many are called, but few are chosen. Let us say all are called, but only few are chosen. And for that, to be chosen, we have to be in that line, or rather the will of God in our life. So my dear friends, perhaps, as I said, an ordinary message, but with an extraordinary punch, to ask ourselves, first of all, am I following the dictates of the Lord in my life? If God has called me, if God has inspired me, if God has motivated me over something, perhaps have I kept it up? Secondly, perhaps the ones I have rejected God's call, I have said no to God's call, perhaps I need to make it up. And in this sense, the ones who are rejected perhaps could be one of ours, or it could be myself, to realize that I have rejected. And thirdly, God doesn't stay back. God doesn't wait infinitely. He calls the others. Perhaps in our eyes they may not be very much worthy, but then God calls them. And maybe I'm the one who is called, though I was not invited, but God fills me up, brings me, gives me a second chance, another chance in my life. And finally, the identity mark of my Christianity, of my surrender to the Lord, of my willingness to be in the will of God, is also important for me. May God bless you in this Sunday, very especially with this message.